She stepped into the night to protect innocent children and never came back. Atlanta, June 2010. CIA agent Nina Calloway, one of the first black female operatives assigned to dismantle an interstate human trafficking ring, vanished in the middle of the bustling city without leaving a single trace. Records show Nina left her small apartment in College Park just after nightfall, carrying classified documents on a suspicious trucking company. She sent one last text to her colleague, Kevin Monroe, "You'll be back before dawn." But dawn came, and Nina never returned for 9 long years. Both the CIA and federal law enforcement scoured every street, apartment, and financial record of the suspected traffickers. They rescued dozens of trafficked children, but there was no sign of Nina. Her case turned into a cold file gathering dust, an open wound for her elderly mother and the black community where she was born. No one expected that nearly a decade later, a terrified little girl, battered and bruised, would escape from an SUV parked near Savannah, Georgia, when rescued by locals. The girl clutched a small object and whispered a name long forgotten: Nina. Nina Calloway. Nina Calloway grew up in South Fulton, Atlanta, a neighborhood with a large African-American community, where every child understood that the road to success would never be smooth. From a young age, Nina was known for the fierce determination in her eyes, her warm, steady voice, and her uncompromising stance against injustice, as the only child of a nurse mother and a father who worked as a mechanic. Nina was raised on stories of black women who had been ignored and abandoned by the very systems meant to protect them. During high school, she threw herself into community work helping children with homework, supporting single mothers in finding housing, and campaigning for the local police to offer self-defense classes for women, when she earned a full scholarship to Howard University. The entire neighborhood threw a farewell party. They were proud because Nina stood as living proof that their daughters, too, deserved to dream big. After graduating with honors in political science, Nina joined the CIA, determined to use her intelligence and courage to dismantle criminal networks exploiting children and marginalized women. Her colleagues described her as a quiet storm calm, razor sharp, but always ready to erupt when someone was threatened. Nina wasn't just an agent. She was a symbol of hope for forgotten communities, a reminder that justice could reach everyone, no matter their skin color or background. In the 2000s, Atlanta emerged as a booming center of economy, technology, and entertainment, the fastest growing hub in the South. Skyscrapers rose, highways expanded, and the city's population swelled with newcomers from neighboring states. Yet beneath this glittering facade, Atlanta also became the Southeast's hidden capital of human trafficking, a major crossroads for transporting victims across state lines throughout the decade. The FBI and NGOs repeatedly sounded the alarm about thousands of missing children each year, most of them black or Asian immigrants. Many were never found, and the media often reported their disappearances with little depth or urgency. South Fulton, Nina's childhood home, had a rate of missing black women and children 3 times the national average. The families left behind often felt abandoned, crying out for help in vain. That injustice fueled Nina's resolve. Atlanta was also home to massive trucking companies, warehouses, and container yards, providing the perfect cover for traffickers to hide victims in freight trucks moving across Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. Hundreds of miles of highways crisscrossed the city like giant veins, pathways of opportunity for some, but corridors of terror for others. For Nina, Atlanta wasn't just her hometown, it was the front line, where she was determined to expose and sever the hidden links of these criminal chains lurking in the city's bright lights. In June 2010, after nearly 2 years tracking a trucking company suspected of transporting victims across state lines in secret compartments, Nina received a critical tip. An insider was ready to hand over evidence, a list of trafficked children and their transport routes. This could have been the biggest breakthrough of her career, and the key to the CIA's operation. On the night of June 12th, Nina left her small College Park apartment, dressed discreetly, careful not to carry any obvious weapons. She sent a brief message to Kevin Monroe, her close colleague and college friend. "You'll be back before dawn. If I don't return, start with Eastgate Logistics." That was the last message Kevin ever received. When the sun rose, Nina was nowhere to be found. His calls went unanswered. Kevin rushed to her apartment. The kitchen sink still held unwashed dinner plates. The bed was unmade, but her laptop and all case-related documents were gone. 2 days later, police discovered Nina's sedan abandoned on a wooded roadside outside Atlanta. The car door was ajar, the interior untouched, but her phone's SIM card had been removed. There were no foreign DNA traces, no witnesses, and no traffic cameras working during her disappearance. It was as if Nina had vanished off the face of the earth. Her mysterious disappearance sent shockwaves through the community, especially among the families of missing children whom Nina had helped. They hadn't just lost a fierce protector, they lost the fragile hope that justice might one day come for them. The moment Nina's car was discovered on that deserted forest road, every level of law enforcement was mobilized. Kevin Monroe immediately reported to his superiors at the CIA, and within hours, federal agents, Atlanta police, and a rapid response team had sealed off the area. But the scene was eerily empty. The ground around the car bore almost no fresh footprints, the hardened summer mud offering little clue, and only a few old tire tracks impossible to date. Technicians found Nina's purse in the car's trunk, containing her wallet, CIA ID badge, and a brand new lipstick, but the classified files and laptop were gone. The fact that Nina personally carried such sensitive documents instead of placing them in the secure CIA vault, as protocol required, made many fear she'd been lured into a sophisticated trap within 72 hours. The CIA exhausted every lead investigating suspects Nina had been tracking, tracing any possible phone signals, interrogating colleagues, friends, even questioning Kevin, the last person to hear from her, but every path led to a dead end. There were no ransom demands. No one used Nina's credit cards or identity. It was as if Nina had simply evaporated from the world. Meanwhile, local and national media seized on the story of a missing CIA agent. Some reports painted Nina as reckless, acting alone against orders. Others floated cruel speculations that she might have betrayed the agency and gone on the run, a narrative so harsh it nearly caused her mother to collapse upon hearing it. The South Fulton community was outraged, organizing candlelight vigils and stringing banners across the streets, "Bring Nina home." Confusion quickly turned to fear, especially among families of children Nina had protected if she had been taken. Who might be next? The investigation expanded along 3 fronts. First, authorities combed every traffic camera, CCTV feed near the scene, gas stations, restaurants, and hotels within a 30-mile radius. The result was chilling. Every camera on the main highways leading to the disappearance site experienced simultaneous technical failures for 1 hour, precisely matching Nina's last known movements. The FBI concluded the surveillance system had been remotely sabotaged by someone with advanced technical skills beyond the capabilities of small-time criminals. Second, the CIA scrutinized all records from Eastgate Logistics, the company Nina had been investigating. This company owned a sprawling network of warehouses across Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina, and had previously been suspected of smuggling contraband, though it had never been convicted. Eastgate's fleet of nearly 300 trucks moved constantly across state lines, making tracking nearly impossible. Worse, the company's financial ties to major real estate firms and high-powered local attorneys created a fortress of legal obstacles that stalled every attempt at deeper investigation. Third, the CIA and FBI focused on Nina's personal network, friends, acquaintances, colleagues, and witnesses who had contacted her. They uncovered several cryptic messages Nina had sent 3 days before. She vanished messages containing only times and locations, but no recipients' names. The email addresses receiving these notes no longer existed, and the trail ended at a foreign server, leaving investigators unable to trace who had been in contact with Nina before she disappeared. Finding Nina became the FBI's top priority in the southern region, but nearly 6 months passed with no new leads. Gradually, the public's attention shifted to other headlines, and Nina's family and the South Fulton community sank into a heavy silence. By early 2011, after over 7 months of fruitless searching, the CIA officially reclassified Nina's case as a cold case, downgrading all active efforts to find her. Though Kevin Monroe pressed relentlessly to expand the investigation, He was placed on extended leave for being too emotionally involved. Every morning, Nina's mother knocked on the local police station's door, asking, "Is there any news about my daughter today?" But all she ever received was a sympathetic shake of the head. Meanwhile, baseless rumors began to spread online, claiming Nina had betrayed the CIA, sold secrets, and fled. Tabloid articles dredged up her past, publishing sensational headlines implying she'd had illicit relationships with suspects she was investigating, smearing her name even further in South Fulton. Heartbreak and frustration quickly fractured the community. Many were furious at what they saw as proof that missing black victims received lower priority. Others grew fearful, staying silent and avoiding Nina's name so as not to draw unwanted attention. Kevin sank into near despair, yet refused to give up. He secretly gathered Eastgate logistics records and kept searching for new leads, honoring the promise he had made to Nina's mother, "I won't stop until I know what really happened." But year after year, Nina Calloway's file faded into obscurity among thousands of other missing persons cases. The young woman once seen as a beacon of hope for her community became just an old photograph on her mother's living room wall, smiling brightly, yet with eyes that seemed to pierce through time, still waiting for her story to be told. On August 3rd, 2019, an approximately 11-year-old girl was found wandering in a panicked state along the shoulder of a highway near Savannah, Georgia. Her tattered dress hung in shreds. Her body was smeared with dirt, and her feet were covered in cuts. An elderly woman driving by stopped her car, wrapped the child in a blanket, and called the police at the local hospital. Doctors noted the girl was severely exhausted, extremely malnourished, and covered in overlapping bruises, both old and new, in a semi-conscious haze. The girl kept repeating one name. Nina Calloway medical staff didn't know what it meant, but recorded the words to pass on to law enforcement. When nurses changed the girl's clothes, they found her clutching an object in her small, rigid hand, a tarnished silver necklace engraved with the tiny letters Nina C., though the girl's fingers were locked in fear. The moment light reflected off the necklace, she began to relax, gasping for breath before drifting into sleep. Local police immediately searched their databases for Nina Calloway. Though nearly 9 years had passed, her missing persons case was still archived under a special federal case number. They sent an urgent report to the FBI. The discovery of an unidentified child holding the necklace of an agent missing for almost a decade was a shocking development. News of this reached Kevin Monroe, who had since left the CIA and was working as a private security consultant. Kevin could hardly believe what he heard Nina's name uttered by a complete stranger, and the very necklace he knew Nina had worn since childhood. A hope he thought long dead flared back to life, even as his rational mind told him the chances Nina was still alive were slim. Once stabilized, the girl was moved to a secure location. She spoke little, instead staring fearfully out the window, flinching whenever a truck roared by. Psychologists spent hours earning her trust, patiently piecing together fragments of her memory. She told them her name was Leah, unable to recall her last name, only that she'd been held somewhere with a musty smell and cold drafts blowing through the floorboards. She described nights filled with the sound of women sobbing in the dark, men shouting in a language she didn't understand, and trucks rumbling away into the night. Leah didn't know what state she was in when she escaped, but remembered a few details: a rusted mesh window, a rotting wooden door, a brick room painted splotchy white. Most crucially, she insisted, there was someone named Nina. She took care of me. She got sick and couldn't get up anymore. They beat her a lot, trembling with terror. Leah recounted the last time she saw Nina. She pressed the necklace into my hand and whispered, "If you get out, take this. Don't let them find you again." Her testimony left the entire interview room in stunned silence. No one knew if Nina was alive or dead, but the necklace perfectly matched the description given years earlier by Nina's mother. And Leah's scattered memories offered the first real clues to Nina's possible location in nearly a decade. Kevin Monroe joined the special FBI task force, dispatched immediately to Savannah to meet with Leah in person. Seeing the necklace himself worn, but still bearing the clear engraving Nina C., Kevin was flooded with memories of Nina's 16th birthday, the day her parents gave her this gift, along with a promise etched on it never to give up. He took a deep breath, bearing his anguish so as not to frighten Leah. Using details from Leah's account, investigators began to analyze musty smell, drafts through floorboards, mesh window, whitewashed brick walls. They cross-referenced dozens of warehouses, abandoned buildings, and derelict farms within a 300-mile radius of where Leah was found. One site stood out, an old farm in Reedsville, South Carolina, matching her description exactly. Records showed it had belonged to Eastgate Logistics from 2010 to 2012 before being transferred to an anonymous investment fund. Though supposedly abandoned since 2014, neighbors occasionally reported trucks arriving late at night. Kevin and the tactical team decided to move out that very night. Convinced the truth about Nina lay beneath the floors of this long-forgotten farm inside him. A desperate hope battled his greatest fear that they would find Nina alive, or only the remains of the partner he had always considered a sister. Kevin Monroe and the federal task force set out that very night, speeding down hundreds of miles of empty southern highways. Their headlights swept over faded signs and abandoned gas stations, the silence stretching endlessly, broken only by periodic radio check-ins. No one spoke much. They all felt the crushing weight of their mission if Nina was still alive. Every minute of delay could be a death sentence. If she was gone, at least they could bring the truth home to her family and community. At dawn's first light, they arrived at the abandoned farm in Reedsville, at the end of a rutted dirt road flanked by towering weeds, through binoculars. They scanned the crumbling buildings. Moonlight glinted off a half-closed front door and shattered window frames. But what caught their attention were the fresh tire tracks, etched into the damp mud. Clear evidence that the property wasn't nearly as deserted as the paperwork suggested. A local officer confirmed the farm had once belonged to Eastgate Logistics, later sold to a Delaware shell company with a meaningless name on paper. The team silently fanned out, deploying acoustic sensors to detect the faintest movement. The air was thick with a damp, biting chill that seemed to cling even in summer, for a brief moment. Kevin wondered how many nights Nina had listened to that same whistling wind through the cracks in the floor, fighting to survive in the darkness. The task force split into two teams, one approaching from the front door, the other, led by Kevin, circling to the side entrance. Inside, the main house was a collapsing shell of rotted wood floors and walls mottled with black mold. Everything looked frozen in time, but a few recently discarded water bottles and a takeout container suggested someone had been there not long before. At the end of a dim hallway, they found a door leading down to the basement. The wooden steps groaned under their boots. Flashlights sliced through the gloom, revealing a low ceiling, brick walls with peeling white paint, and a stifling stench of mold mixed with rusty metal. In the center of the room stood a steel frame bolted to the concrete floor, its handhold still bound with restraints, and dried brown bloodstains spattered the ground nearby. Kevin froze when he saw a desiccated skeleton slumped against the far wall, both wrists still chained with metal wire. Nearby lay scraps of dark green fabric, the distinctive tactical uniform worn by CIA field operatives, on the left wrist of the remains. The silver Nina's Seat necklace shimmered faintly in the beam of his flashlight. For a moment, Kevin felt he could hear Nina's voice whispering, "I'm sorry I couldn't come home," and his heart shattered. Forensic specialists immediately began processing the basement, photographing the scene and collecting evidence. They uncovered old bottles of anesthetic, syringes, moldy bandages, and plastic zip ties, undeniable proof that Nina had been held captive and tortured for an extended period before her death. A forensic expert noted fractures in her forearm and ribs, signs of brutal, repeated beatings. One detail sent a chill through everyone present. Etched into the basement wall with a rusty nail were the words 8/12/10 Mom, and hope messages Nina likely carved when she still had strength. The date, 8/12/10, matched exactly the day she vanished. The final letters trailed off, the strokes weakening before stopping altogether. Kevin sank to his knees, clutching the necklace, whispering, "I'm so sorry." Nina, but he knew this pain wasn't his alone. It belonged to the entire community that had once pinned its hopes on her. They immediately secured the scene, called in forensic transport, and alerted the federal investigation team. Inside. Rage surged through Kevin, who had turned Nina into a warning for other victims who was still out there. Keeping this trafficking ring alive, he vowed that the truth Nina had spent her life chasing would never be buried again. Once the scene was secured, the forensics team began combing every corner of the basement. Behind a false wooden panel, they uncovered an old safe. Inside lay stacks of documents, ledgers, warehouse rental contracts, and coded shipping manifests. But what left the team stunned were numerous files containing photographs of children and women, along with brief notes listing their ages, identifying features, and shipment codes. Among the papers were records explicitly naming Eastgate Logistics, confirming Nina's suspicions from before she vanished. Alongside these were massive payment contracts signed by shell companies, tracing money through multiple countries before returning to the U.S. Some signatures and bank accounts were linked to prominent real estate investors and well-known charitable foundations, organizations long praised for their community work. The investigation team immediately understood Nina had not disappeared in vain. She had quietly uncovered the trafficking network and gathered the evidence, then somehow hid it before succumbing. Her suffering, her sacrifice, was the key to exposing this horrific system. News of Nina's death reached her mother in Atlanta, nearly causing her to collapse. But when Kevin shared the proof Nina had left behind, her mother grasped his hand through her tears and said, "My baby kept her promise. She didn't give up." The FBI and CIA swiftly launched a covert operation, coordinating with financial crime and cybercrime units across 4 southern states. They quietly installed listening devices and placed key suspects under surveillance men who had long posed as generous community benefactors. Within days, undercover agents gathered more damning evidence from secret meetings where ringleaders openly discussed shipping the next human cargo. One intercepted conversation captured them scoffing about a CIA girl who's been dead for years, confident that no one dared investigate anymore. Their arrogance ignited fury not only in the investigators, but across the community. When news of the breakthrough leaked to the press, Georgia was rocked. Nina's face, once ignored by the media, appeared on front pages everywhere, becoming a new symbol of the fight against human trafficking under mounting public pressure. State officials were forced to issue statements, promising to expand the investigation, provide support for victims, and pursue prosecution using the evidence Nina had uncovered. Within 48 hours, nearly 20 suspects were handcuffed. Trucks owned by shell companies were intercepted on highways, rescuing more children and women still alive. As federal teams continued raiding Eastgate Logistics warehouses and storage sites, they found an additional 15 children and women, most of them black or undocumented immigrants trapped in horrific conditions. They were rushed to hospitals and safe shelters, seeing the children being carried out of the trucks. Kevin couldn't hold back his tears. He knew this was the reason Nina had risked everything. At a special press conference in Atlanta, the FBI director declared Nina Calloway a hero, posthumously awarding her the Medal of Freedom, the first ever given to an agent fallen in the fight against human trafficking. Nina's mother stood on the podium, clutching a photograph of her daughter, her voice trembling but resolute. "My child did not die in vain. Make sure no other child ever has to suffer what she did." The image of that moment spread across social media, turning Nina Calloway's case into a catalyst for shifting public awareness about human trafficking and atrocity hiding in plain sight within America's cities. Standing beside Nina's mother, Kevin vowed before everyone watching, "We will not let Nina's legacy end here. We will keep fighting for those who have no voice." It was not just a promise, it was the unyielding resolve of an entire community, one that had lost Nina once, but would not lose anyone else again. After the shocking press conference, the abandoned farm in Reedsville, the place where Nina's remains were found, was placed under tight protection by investigators to complete the forensic work. For days, police cars, investigators, and reporters lined the once silent dirt road. But before long, locals began leaving bouquets of flowers, small stuffed animals, and wooden signs engraved with the words, "Nina, our hero." Every morning, mothers brought their children to stand quietly before the derelict house, telling them the story of the young woman who sacrificed herself to save innocent lives. Images of these solemn gatherings appeared on national news, sparking a profound question across America: how many victims like Nina had been forgotten simply because they weren't deemed newsworthy nonprofit organizations. In Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama reported record donations from communities nationwide, demanding comprehensive government plans to fight human trafficking. On the day of Nina's funeral, hundreds gathered in South Fulton, not only friends and family, but also families she had helped. The funeral procession wound through streets, past shops and neighborhoods Nina once walked through, as residents lined the sidewalks, hands over their hearts, eyes glistening with tears, paying tribute to the woman they now honored as a warrior. As the convoy reached the cemetery at sunset, the final rays of the day fell across her headstone, engraved with the words, "Nina Calloway, brave, compassionate, never forgotten," after the funeral. Kevin Monroe didn't go home right away. He stopped at the rescue shelter where the children recently freed from Eastgate logistics warehouses were receiving care, walking past rows of small beds. He saw faces still wary, but no longer consumed by the terror they'd known inside those trucks. A boy, about 6 years old, tugged at Kevin's jacket and asked softly, "Are you the one who found Miss Nina?" Kevin knelt, looking into the boy's eyes with gentle warmth, and replied, "She's the one who showed us the way." In the dim hospital hallway light, Kevin shared stories about Nina, the woman who dreamed of a safer world for them, for the first time in days. A few children giggled as he recounted how Nina used to do coin tricks that delighted kids in her old neighborhood. Tiny sparks of hope began to flicker back to life in hearts nearly crushed by violence. That day, Kevin agreed to serve as the ambassador for a new special care program for trafficking survivors, the Nina Calloway Children's Hope Fund, a foundation created from fines and assets seized from the arrested traffickers. The fund's mission was to help victims reintegrate, providing education, psychological counseling, and a chance to rebuild their lives. It was Nina's greatest legacy, not a legacy of flashy heroics, but of restored hope. The story of Nina Calloway reached its end, but a larger question still echoed: how many others like her are still out there in the darkness, waiting for someone brave enough to reach them each year? Thousands of children and women vanish from our communities, yet only a few cases are ever made public, and even fewer receive the attention they deserve. In a moment of remembrance, Kevin spoke before the cameras. No one deserves to be forgotten just because they aren't famous, wealthy, or powerful. He urged every viewer pay attention, look out for the children around you, and never hesitate to report something suspicious. One person's awareness, care, and courage can save many others, just as Nina did. And you? What do you think really happened the night Nina disappeared? Do you believe someone else was behind this criminal network? Share your thoughts below this video. Comment "I do too" if you believe every victim deserves to be remembered and protected by justice, because only when their stories are told can we turn loss into a force for change. And that's how, no matter how small we are, we can carry on the legacy of Nina Calloway.